Welcome back. This is the third episode of CybinSpace. We want to thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to be discussing how to integrate psilocybin into our current society. We got some great panelists. We're ready to talk about this. Welcoming back Anthony. And we have Matt Whistler. Jeanette Small with Lucid Cradle, Paul Stanford with the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation and Cannabis Common Sense. On our Zoom call, we have Jana Champagne and Heather Shelton. We're going to talk more today about our experiences, some of our clients' experiences with psilocybin, and that discussion, Of course, I could talk for days about this one, but I love to get some of you guys' opinion. Paul, you want to start off the conversation?
Back in the 80s, I picked a lot of mushrooms. That's my experience. And so I picked a lot of mushrooms, and I got a number of doses, and I remember I would hear these sounds. They're auditory hallucinations. My cousin and I called it earth music. But when I went to a Grateful Dead show some years later, I saw they kind of imitated that earth music. They could play what I heard during those psilocybin trips. How common are these auditory hallucinations in psilocybin?
I would personally say they were quite common. I recently just had the experience after a car wreck. And, two things was my experience was very visual, very powerful. And at the end of my experience, I could hear the same noise, and it was almost like a metallic vibration.
Sound effects.
Like a sound effect. And, for me, I could actually feel where my brain was stuttering a little bit, but I could feel like my neural pathways really, massaging those processes open during my experience.
Funny you mention a car wreck. So I did have a client, this was very early on in my facilitation practice, who had suffered a traumatic brain injury, and they had vestibular nerve damage, and they also resulted in atypical migraines. And these atypical migraines would manifest themselves quite often in seizure-like symptoms. And she actually did a wonderful job in preparing me of what to expect, that things that might come up during the session for her. And she also expressed that during these migraines, when she would have these seizure-like symptoms, she couldn't talk, and she would get frustrated that she couldn't talk and couldn't communicate, and that would often start crying as a result. The interesting thing is, in the session, the migraines kicked in. She basically had these seizures throughout the entire session, but she found that she was able to talk and communicate completely fine, just like normal. And afterwards, she actually said she had not experienced those migraines for quite some time after the session, like a much longer period than would normally go by without experiencing those. And she said that she felt like her brain was healing. And so to me, that just reflects also a lot of the neuroplasticity that is created in these experiences. And I'm not a neurologist. She wasn't, getting scanned and all of that during the session. But I would not be at all surprised if, her brain was finding a workaround for those vocal centers and things like that it didn't have previously. And she wants to continue having sessions every 2 or 3 months. She's finding them highly beneficial. And that head injury was the result of a car accident as well. So that's what made me think of that story.
Wow. It is definitely a moving experience, and there's so much could be studied. I mean, I've had, it's fun to have, very visual experiences, but it's also great to have very healing experiences as well. Have you had any great experiences on psilocybin, Jeanette?
Of course, I've had great experiences, and I've had lots of clients who've had great experiences as well. So I would like to kind of share how I think about what psilocybin does in the brain and what it does for us in terms of bringing us into the present moment and opening up opportunities for us to explore the world differently. So the way I think about it is when we're born, our brains are not really differentiated very much. And we're perceiving the world through all of our senses, but that perception is kind of disorganized. It is sort of, a cacophony of vibrations that we're perceiving through all the different channels. And it is difficult to make sense of that. So when we're looking at very young children, they might get very emotionally responsive to certain stimuli. There's no real consistency and predictability in how they're going to walk through life. And it takes us quite a few years to learn how to limit some of the information that we're receiving into acting through, let's say, a persona, the ego that drives us. This is a very functional way to do this. We need to do this in order to be able to function like an adult, get our work done, make sure to take care of our lives. But then we become really centered around that persona. And sometimes that persona becomes limiting in our daily life. Sometimes the context changes and we go, well, now this persona is not serving me. Psilocybin sets us into a condition temporarily of being much younger in our ability to perceive through our senses. So when we're opening all of those channels, we're once again visiting the self that was there before the persona that we chose as, the primary persona took hold. So this is why we're perceiving things through synesthetic processes. We can, taste colors, we can hear, colors or whatever else. And that allows for us to sort of do like an inventory of the intrapsychic process and to see what might be necessary to bring to the front in that present moment. And that is really profoundly important to our experience as human beings.
When I got started in this, dissolving the ego death was so important, to me, and that's what I had considered in the beginning. And I had even decided to write my final paper on, ending the ego death. We were even going to be at the big trade show. We were going to get a Nerf gun, a Gatling Nerf gun, and write egos and be like, we're killing egos over here. And we put that aside because through my personal study and studying the subject, it was not necessarily finding, ending or destroying our egos. It was finding that balance between our egos and how we perceive ourselves with our empathy of others and our love of others. That in my last psilocybin experience, that is exactly what I experienced. I was having a very visual experience. And I'll never forget because I had this moment where I come out of my experience and I seen a mosquito. And I hate mosquitoes. I'm from the South. We don't like mosquitoes. And I seen this mosquito, and there's mosquitoes flying, and I could see it. And all I could think of was actually having the empathy for the mosquito and not killing the mosquito because it's just trying to survive too. And that was just an overwhelming sense of, where that ego starts to dissolve and you start to see the world and everybody that's in it as one whole being and one whole being to this. Would any of our Zoom participants love to participate in this conversation?
Yeah, Willie, because what you were just speaking to about empathy, something that I see with folks and I really try to bring into integration is compassion, and not just compassion for others, because for some reason in this human condition, it's so hard for us to have compassion for ourselves, for being human, for screwing up, for, making bad choices, for doing all of these things that we end up feeling like we're not good people for, or I didn't do that the right way, So psilocybin kind of gives you this, it's an opportunity to actually feel some self-love, and my last experience, that was my intention, right? For me, my intentions are, what do the mushrooms have to teach me today? And then I want to experience self-love. And a huge part of that is self-compassion. And so that's something that I like to, since we're talking a little bit about integration here too, to really bring into integration and remind, just a gentle reminder, we are all human. Let's be kind to ourselves like we are to other people. So I do believe psilocybin offers that in the empathy for others and even mosquitoes, and also hopefully for ourselves too.
That's a great point. For yourself, that was another experience I had gone through. And I was struggling with, overcoming some of, am I even fit for this space? And, what makes me okay to be in this space? And in doing so, I found, with the psilocybin has showed me that all of the struggles I had from when I was a youth, that I was still beating myself up, 25 years later over. I had never actually found that self-love to forgive myself. And it was in a psilocybin session, and it hit like it was almost like, the flashing of a camera where the bulb blows up, and I actually had that moment of forgiving myself, for my past. And it was a very eye-opening experience personally. And it was a psilocybin session, a personal psilocybin session, because I had done many psilocybin sessions with many peoples and groups and all of this and fun nights, and back when that was kind of illegal, but I had the joke was always 5 grams in the closet, so I took 5 grams in a tiny little apartment next to the ocean, and and it worked. So those experiences ourselves as facilitators, help us, help people find their journey, because once again as a facilitator, we take that non-directive approach. And one of the things in our class that was so beautifully a beautiful segment I had learned in our class was, a doctor does not repair our skin. When we get a gash or cut, a doctor is not the one who's, repairing ourselves. What they'll do is they'll clean it up, they'll sew it together, they'll make sure there's no, buildup of bacteria that gets infected. But it's our own bodies that heal ourselves. And the same is similar with our minds. Our own minds can help heal ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing.
Mushrooms, especially psilocybin, right? We're all looking for a matter of change. We get to a point in our life where where we'll start to think of ways to change ourselves. Mushrooms will bring the perspective of many perspectives, right? And that right there is a significant moment of change. And so what we want to try to do is we want to harness, right, this perspectives and see things in a different way. I wanted to take it back to what she was talking about as you start to grow, right? And, as we start to grow, we develop patterns. And when we start off young, we have a lot of neurons that are connected, right? And just like children, they soak information. These neurons want to take it all in. And so as we start to get older, right, certain neurons, we put ourselves in different patterns, right? And then we utilize only what we need, right? So others are starting to die off, and we incorporate only what we need, right? So mushrooms, right, will bring out those neurons that were in that pattern of where we, disregarded them, and bring out a new way of seeing things, right? So it'll bring back that childlike grasp of information, of wanting to grasp information. And so the stimulation that mushrooms will bring a change from a deeper perspective to where you can see things as an observation from the outside of yourself, right? Not just from one angle, but from many different angles, so that you can fix the many different things that you want to fix within yourself. Stimulation is what we need in our herbal medicines, and basically everything that we are trying to see in incorporating our minds to see things different, right? And mushrooms will bring that. It has 1,000, I call it 1,000 perspectives, right? And 1,000 perspectives of seeing many different things. The taking into perspective of being kind to yourself is one of them. You know, we are not looking for leaps and bounds. We are taking steps, and these steps are foundational steps. These are foundational steps to where we're not going to fall back, right? Mushrooms give us the agility to move forward, you know, and we want to stay in that motion. So, you know, we have to sometimes look into small doses of microdosing so that we can gain the concept of building ourselves even more. You know, we talk about big dosages, right? And then it lasts for a moment and a matter, right? And in doing those matters of moments, right, we see perspectives, right? But if we were to limit it, right, take it into small doses every single day, we're opening blockages within our minds, preparing our bodies for the environments that that we're being put into, like right now, right? And so being that my mind is stimulated, right, it's overriding the factor of me being here and preparing my body for this environment that I'm in, so it gets rid of anxiety, depression. These are different things that hold us back from our true potential.
You're so overwhelmed with all these thoughts during an experience. It's almost when you come out of it and you're trying to tell your friends the experience you have, you feel like that little kid that's like, you know, saying so much, but it makes no sense. You know? Jenna Champagne, you had something to add to the conversation?
Yes, of course. And so I'm actually a student of herbalism right now. I'm in Heather Shelton's course, then we graduate in December. So I'm,
Nice.
after being in the cannabis industry as a nurse and a patient and medical professional educator for a decade, I'm really starting to expand into all of the plant medicine and just finding that there's powerful synergy
Yes.
when we are using the correct plants or the correct combination of plants,
Yes.
really
Yes.
targeted specifically for that patient's needs.
Right.
Not yet a psilocybin facilitator. That may be my next step. But I do know plenty of people that are using psilocybin and have just seen some amazing results in them. You know, probably the most prolific case I can think of is a very good friend recently had a really substantial trauma, and it was caused by betrayal and resulted in a breach in his family, and he lost his only living sibling through that disagreement. And he was just forlorn. There was huge financial impact for him, basically lost his life savings. And he was basically suicidal. He did not see much of a reason to
Right.
continue, you know, aside from his daughter that he has. I think that's the reason he made it through, honestly.
Right.
And, you know, partway through, you know, he's a cannabis user in the cannabis industry. He began microdosing psilocybin.
Yeah.
And you know, he had done EMDR therapy, which is really renowned for helping people overcome trauma and PTSD.
Yeah.
And it just was not enough. But once he
No.
started the psilocybin, I saw a real
Little by
shift.
little. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a shift in his mindset, and he
Yeah.
began. He had quality of life again. He seemed to have motivation to continue
Mm-hmm.
living. His optimism began to come
Yeah.
back. You know, his self-love, his self-care, his self-forgiving, all of those motives you guys were talking about, all
Yeah.
of those motifs, you know, re-engaged in his life and really came into a spiritual state of non-attachment, which I think
Yeah.
is so important. I think
Yeah.
so much of the resistance that we respond to in certain life events is a big part of why we make it so hard. And I've experienced this myself, you know, through a pretty profound illness about a decade ago. I learned some of these themes of non-attachment and ego surrender, like you were talking about, Willie. And you know, I used to joke with people that I was stripped down to my core, lost almost everything, and had to rebuild from that rubble. And what that does to your ego transformation is just really profound.
Yeah.
And so I definitely see the potential of psilocybin to help facilitate that for people, minus the health crisis.
Yeah.
So I think it's really powerful what we can bring to this population that is in so much need. I mean, we know that mental health is at crisis levels, especially in our younger population. You know, I just heard recently that nurses and medical professional suicides are at all-time highs after COVID and all the PTSD
Yeah.
that brought to frontline
Yeah.
workers. You know, if we could just educate them and help them understand the potential benefits for themselves and really set up the regulatory structure and the legislative structure to allow those suffering, you know, specifically medical professionals, many of who are still drug tested and can't utilize plant medicine freely like they should be able to.
Right.
You know, those are really actionable things we can do and make a huge impact
Yeah.
in those that are suffering. So
Yeah.
One of my most moving stories was an interview I had done with this person, and it was her grandfather had a very incurable cancer, and yeah, he wanted to do the interview, and I was really looking forward to seeing what he was going to say on how psilocybin was helping, and that's exactly how it helped him, was just that understanding that, you know, this was not everything and all, and that you should enjoy these moments that he does have, even though it's pretty much uncurable. There's, you know, no chance, but in the psilocybin sessions, he was able to find himself to be able to find that courage to just hang out with his granddaughter while he is here. And it's done a wonder for their relationships. And in doing so, it has extended, you know, his date, you know, ticker went and passed, and he's still, you know, enjoying life to the fullest. And I think that's something that is, you know, misconstrued. Like, we hear it all the time, you know, as facilitators, you know, can you cure my anxiety? You know, I'm like, if you have $1 billion, but the reality is, yeah, the reality is, you know, there's no, like, there's no magical pill, you know, it's always having to do the work on self, your inner self, your shadow self, and that's how, you know, we achieve these goals when we do these sessions. And that's something that you got to go into these sessions, you know, understanding and knowing, you know. Yeah.
One more quick thing, if you don't mind. I wanted to reference back to what Paul said earlier about being able to hear the plants. And there's actually a device on the market. It's called Plant Wave, and I'm not a salesperson for them or anything, but you can actually connect this device to a plant.
Plant wave.
And it makes sound waves based on the plant's biochemical.
Bioelectric stimulation.
So you have to wonder if it's just a shift in our sensory system that allows us to tune into that the psilocybin facilitates. Really interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a communication between mushrooms, and so we interact towards that. Yeah, that's very interesting. I've been studying on that, actually.
Yeah.
And
cool.
because the thing is that through that type of idea, right? It's just through an idea, right? We're looking at a new way of type of healing, if you know what I'm saying, through these electric magnetic pulsing, the communication that mushrooms have. You know, they have high electric magnetic pulsings, and so when they enter the body, right? And our bodies are 90% water, right? Or so they say, but but when we put it into our body, right? Electricity, water, stimulation, you know, we're really opening up new ideas and new ways of seeing the world. So, you know, bringing yourself into a knowing, right, is about opening yourself up to new ideas. And so mushrooms, psilocybin especially, will help you to change the factor of your life by seeing things through many perspectives, you know, and it will help you to become a better individual. Because right now in this world, it's all about our own individualism, right? And us bringing in the order and keeping out the chaos. So it will help to segregate these ideas, right? And then that way you can decide which ideas to bring within you. So
I think too, the symbiosis, you know, like when it comes to growing mushrooms, you know, cubensis, you know, is one of the mushrooms that can grow with humans. You know, humans do help cubensis grow. And there's so many other mushrooms that do not have relationships with humans, like Amanita muscaria requires the symbiotic relationship between trees for it to grow and flourish. And I think, you know, in some higher divine, you know, just asking questions here, I think there's a question that evolves around, like, is the mushroom conversation bringing us a symbiosis with ourselves, with our earth, with our nature? with that dumb mosquito that wanted to suck my blood, and that symbiotic relationship of caring for one another, and not just us as humans, but caring for our plants, our species.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of speak to what you've spoken to, Anthony, before. I get a lot of questions about, does this work for this? Does it not work for this? And the way that the conversation goes is really through a binary engagement. There is a disease and we can cure it. There's a problem and I can solve it. Whereas the actual answer, from my experience working with clients and having experienced psilocybin myself, it's really about opening yourself up to the multifaceted way that we're perceiving ourselves and the world around us. And so all of the things that we have all spoken to, they all really do matter. We are not outside of nature. We're not an individual that is devoid of the contextual environment in which we are evolving. So we're not alone. We breathe the air, we eat the food, all the things that you've been speaking to, right? So psilocybin allows us to enter into the space of perceiving things through a multifaceted cacophony of vibrations of existence. Yeah. And that allows for us to find, what is the ultimate path that resonates with me? What is my true self? Mm-hmm. Who am I really? And what is it that I want to get out of life? And I think that when we connect with that piece of ourselves, a lot of things sort of fall into place. So it's really not so much about, does this cure this? Does it cure that? It's more an adjustment into an easier, more attuned way of being in the world.
I think it really is. Matt?
I was just going to say, one of the things that really strikes me is we're talking about listening to plants, and I spent a little bit of time in South America working with traditional practitioners, shamans, and they can walk around in the jungle and, this plant is good for treating, now they'll even say this kind of virus, and this plant is good for treating this kind of condition. And if you ask them, well, how did you come to know that? And they say, the plants tell us.
Yeah.
You just have to listen to the plants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you get follow-up where, for good and bad, a lot of times, pharmaceutical companies come in, but then they test these plants and they find, this actually does work and substantiates what these traditional practitioners are saying.
Yeah.
I just think, and that nature connectivity, I think, is really is amazing. I mean, when I first started out in my working life, I've done a lot of different jobs, but I used to work on endangered species recovery programs, and that was my original draw to working with psilocybin, was just through that reinforcing of that nature connectivity.
Right.
And the further we remove ourselves from that, the sicker we become as people, as society. There's absolutely symbiotic relationships between the effects of psilocybin and just spending time in nature. Psilocybin dampens the default mode network, allows you to develop new pathways. Time in nature also dampens the default mode network and strengthens new pathways. So that's like part of every integration I have with clients. I'm like, spend time in nature,
really
whatever that looks like, whether
Because you
it's
can
go
tell
for
the
a hike or walk around your neighborhood and just see the trees.
The stimulation
and
is a
name
lot
3
different.
things that you admire about
thing.
that tree.
And that was, my last experience was very visual. It's like I walked into a boardroom with psilocybin cubensis, and psilocybin cubensis looked me in the eye and said, "I've risked a lot on human beings. You better get it right. You better make sure to integrate your true selves with your daily selves." And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Make sure to check us out on pfatrade.com. Thank you for all the members of the panel, for Janet Champagne, Heather Shelton tuning in through Zoom. Be on the lookout. Maybe you guys can contribute your thoughts and questions to what we're doing here. And we want to thank you for coming into this space. And y'all have a wonderful day.